something that I've been thinking about over the last couple of days. I watched an interview by someone named the Blonde Muslim on the Mo Show. Someone named Candace, who's a Californian American, converted to Islam about 6 to 7 years ago, and she was talking about the struggles of being a Muslim or converting to Islam, and the challenges of converting to Islam, socially. She talked about many things, but one thing that stuck out to me was she mentioned how when she started going to the masjid for the first couple of times, it was very difficult for her to integrate into the masjid culture, masjid environment. She said it was very cliquey. There was a lot of traditions and things that she didn't understand, language she didn't understand, and she found it difficult to integrate into the masjid community. And what's interesting is, for me, I'm a Pakistani born Muslim, and I've been going to the masjid since I was a kid. My parents would take me to the masjid. And I kind of reflected on my own experience, and my experience has been pretty much exactly the same. I've been born in Pakistan, right? Grew up in Canada, so I was Pakistani. So my family, we went to a Desi masjid. If you live in Canada and America, you'll know that most masjids are dominated by specific ethnicity. Like there are Pakistani Indian masjids, like Desi masjids, and where the imam is usually Desi. And then you'll have Arabic masjids, Somali masjids. You have different masjids by different ethnicities, different cultural backgrounds. And a big reason for that is when Muslims that have come to these Western countries, when they first move here, what they identify as first is their ethnicity. They don't sadly identify as Muslims first. They identify as Pakistanis first, like Pakistani first, Indian first, and so they form communities around them that match those ethnicities, not just from a cultural practice perspective, but also from a language perspective. They've surrounded themselves with people who speak Urdu and Hindi and these languages. So, and that's my theory, right? So that's how you have these masjids that are ethnocentric. And so, as a Pakistani, when I first started going to the masjid that I used to go to in Ottawa, it's called Jami Omar, and I thought, and my parents thought, that we would integrate immediately. It wouldn't be a challenge at all. We were very wrong about that. Even though we were Desi, right, and we were fresh Desis, even though we were living in Abu Dhabi, but we were fresher Desis. The politics of the masjid and the masjid community was something that was completely unexpected. We observed that. So my brother and I, we would go to the masjid, go to Sunday school, right, Sunday classes, and every time there was a break or after Zuhur prayer, the kids that had parents that were part of the masjid, volunteer groups, or part of the masjid, club, the main OGs, the imam would talk to them, and they would sit down with the imam, and they were treated like royalty. There was definite favoritism towards them, while everybody else, including us, we were ignored, treated very poorly, disrespected. We were treated like almost like we were non-Muslims, like we were just bad Muslims. And that was a struggle. It was a very serious struggle for my brother and I to reconcile, because we thought, hey, we're Muslim, why are we treated like this? It doesn't make sense. It took me a long time to realize how the cultures of the Muslim countries over the last 100 years have taken a lead in terms of identity, in terms of Islamic identity, right? And when I realized that, I kind of started creating a separation between myself and Pakistani culture. I started almost, moving away from Pakistani culture and focusing on Islam. Now, in my journey, I very quickly realized that. So I realized, okay, you've got Islamic values, right? You know, they got the 5 pillars of Islam, 6 pillars of Iman. You practice those things, you believe in those things, and I was solid and confirm on those things. From a 14, 15, started praying 5 times a day, reading the Quran, fasting, never missed a fast. Like I was committed, 100% committed to Allah, the creed. It was ingrained in me, right? But another aspect of Islam that I always struggled with to reconcile was the community aspect, because the community aspect I really disliked, right? Because the community aspect wasn't an Islamic community aspect, it was a Pakistani community aspect. As in, if I wanted to be part of the community, I had to be a certain level of Pakistani. And I didn't really identify myself as Pakistani anymore. I identified myself as a Canadian. I grew up in the West. I was 8 when I moved to Canada. I spoke the way that I do. I dressed the way that I did. I thought the way that I did. Like I watched the shows that everyone did. I was Canadian for all purposes. So I was kind of like, hey, this is weird. Like I don't, like, what does it mean to have a Muslim community? And to this day, I'm in the same place. I'm married now. I live in the U.S. I'm 31, almost 31. And I still don't feel like I have a community, a Muslim community that I'm integrated to. Even the masjids here in Minnesota, when I go to them, they have a ethnocentric dominance. Like there's an ethnocentric dominance, like there's a Pakistani dominance, or there's a Somali dominance. And immediately I feel left out. Immediately I feel like, hey, if I want to be integrated with these people, I need to some extent, adopt their ethnic culture, their country culture, even though it's non-Islamic, right? I have to speak their language, or I have to eat their foods, or I have to bring some cultural value to this place, and that's very taxing. It's very disorienting. And when you go into a masjid community, when you go into Islamic community, and you see that, you very quickly kind of have this moment where you go, wait a minute, why am I even here? You know, I'm here to be part of a Muslim community, not part of a ethnic community. Like that was not my intention. I'm a Canadian. I'm an American. You know, I'm almost an American. Hopefully, it's very, very upside down, and I've struggled with it for a long time. Still do. And I've been thinking about this last night, and I don't know, but this is my theory, right? I believe this is a symptom of nation states. I believe this is a symptom of Muslim countries orienting themselves to a national identity as opposed to an Islamic identity. When you have a country like Pakistan and people identify themselves as Pakistanis, they prioritize cultural values over Islamic values, right? And this very quickly becomes intertwined with the Islamic values. Like growing up, so many of the things that my parents would teach me about Islam were not in Islam. They were cultural things, Pakistani things. You know, burn chilies for, you know, to get rid of bad vibes or something like that, or, you know, really twisted and non-Islamic things, like magic kind of things that are part of like the ancient Hindu traditions that got rolled into Pakistani culture, that got rolled into, like, reframed and repackaged as Islamic things. And my parents would practice these things, like, actively, and a lot of Muslims do, a lot of Pakistani Muslims do. I know this, right? And it's become so twisted over the last 100 years, 120, 200 years. So I think that if we are to ever become a truly powerful Muslim Ummah, right, I believe the Muslim identity is lost to some extent. I think the Muslim identity is one where people believe it is an identity that you practice in your private homes, like when you're praying, but then when you're in group settings, you put that to the side and you bring out your cultural identity. That's what dominates now, you know, Pakistani or whatever, or Somali. And I think there needs to be a flip. I think people need to realize that we're Muslims first, not Pakistani first. We're Muslims first, not Indian first, not Somali first. Muslims first. That's very important. I think that, I have evidence for this, right? Look at, in Ramadan, a big part of Ramadan is iftar, right? but big iftars. In Pakistan culture, in many cultures, you have these big lavish iftar parties and iftar celebrations and things like that. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with having iftar and eating a lot, but if you're having big iftar parties in Ramadan, where does that come from? It doesn't come from the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he did not have big iftars. Like his whole life, the extent of feeling full was him eating dates. You know, he never even got to see prosperity in that way. So it doesn't come from him, right? The Prophet ﷺ would open his iftar with dates and water, right? But we open it with like 10,000 samosas and pakoras and fruit chaat and chole ki chaat and this drink and lassi and that drink, and it's nauseating. It's truly nauseating. And so every iftar, every Ramadan, we talk about iftar parties and stuff like that, almost as if it's critical to the success of Ramadan. Like if you don't have a big iftar party, if you don't cook this or cook that, your Ramadan is not Ramadan. Like it's come to a point where people, like my parents, were like, we're gonna do a big iftar party. We're gonna do a big iftar every single night. My mother, she's like in her late 50s, 60s. She's, sick and weak, and she can't make most iftars the way that she used to. And she stresses out about that. She like will be on the verge of passing out, making pakoras and this and that because my dad wants that. And I tell my mom all the time, you don't have to do this. This is not important. This is not critical to Ramadan. She's like, no, this is very important. This is part of like, getting together. I'm like, what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Especially now, like, people are starving in Gaza. People are dying of famine. And my mother wants to throw like a big iftar party. Huge iftar party, potluck, at the end of Ramadan. And I told her, like, this can't be right. Don't do this. There's something wrong about this. This doesn't even feel right. Like, my body has a visceral reaction to this, and it tells me that it's wrong. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I just don't know. I don't know where we go from here, right? How do we get to where we need to get to? How do we improve as a Muslim ummah? How do we improve ourselves as Muslim? How do we realize that our cultural identity is literally holding us back, right? It's literally holding us back from progressing as Muslims, and it's a big deterrence factor for new Muslims, newcomers. How do we address this?